Hello everyone, it's Lindsay and welcome back to my channel. So today I am doing part 2 of my Anatomy of Story deep dive video. In the first part, if you missed it, I would recommend going back and watching that. That's where I go over brainstorming, premise, and outlining. How John Truby says to do it and how I kind of adapt his ideas and make them my own. In this video, we're going to be talking about characters, really diving deep and making them pop and just breathe off the page. And we're going to explore the 22 steps of story, or how John Truby says you should be outlining your novel in the most effective and dynamic way to make your story the best. We have a lot to cover in this part, so I am just going to go ahead and dive right in. I just want to remind you once more, we're still brainstorming here, okay? So don't get too caught up on any avenue. This is all for fun. This is all just like thought spirals. Keep all of these ideas in your notebook or on a Word doc or wherever you want to write. You don't have to commit to anything. First, let's talk about weakness and need. These are the most important parts of your story if you are writing any kind of book that has a character arc, which is like 99% of novels. This is your foundation. You gotta get this done in a really good way in order for the rest of the story to flow, for the character to change, for the audience to feel something. And if done right, it's gonna make the audience empathize, sympathize, whichever one, because it's gonna feel meaningful and real and relatable. First of all, we have the weakness, which is the problem that the character has within themselves that is essentially ruining their lives. The need is what the hero must fulfill within to be able to overcome the weakness, to live a better life. Now, your character may or may not be aware of their weakness, but they definitely should not be aware of the need in the beginning. Truby describes two types of needs. The first one is a psychological need. This is the main character overcoming a flaw that is hurting themselves. The second kind is a moral need, where the character must overcome a flaw that is hurting others. Another little vocab word Truby throws in there is moral weakness, and the idea of this is the actual thing that the character is doing to harm others. That is the moral weakness. Most stories do have psychological needs, but in Truby's opinion, the best stories have both. In my books, I did employ both. So for example, with The Glass Switch, my main character's weakness is that she sees herself as worthless. Psychological need would be that Addie needs to learn her worth. Moral need is that Addie needs to stop taking her self-loathing, which is the moral weakness, out on her mother. Now there's a couple ways that you can brainstorm ideas for these. You can start with a weakness that you like, given some of the things we've already brainstormed, and be like, that works really well for X, Y, and Z that I already love that I'm putting in this book, and try to think of what kind of amoral action could come from that. Another way is to take a virtue that you want to give your character and push it to its limits so much that it actually becomes a flaw. So for example, like bravery, you want to have a brave character. Well, what if they are so brave that they're brave to a fault, to where they're actually putting themselves and others in danger? That could be a weakness. This also applies to doing the opposite. You could say, my character values bravery, but let's make the opposite of that their actual weakness. So cowardice. They truly want to be brave, but they are deeply cowardice and cannot be. See how that adds conflict and like the potential for change? Then we have desire, which is the main character's external goal. This is a lot of times linked up with plot, whereas the need is more internal, desire is more external. Once the main character gets a desire, they then start taking action to achieve this goal and therefore change over the course of the story. So again, The Glass Switch, for simple examples, my main character's need is that she needs to learn her worth. The desire, the plot-wise part of this, is that she needs to find the 3 potion ingredients to get rid of the evil witch hunter. Now, by getting this desire, she is going to learn her worthiness over the journey of trying to find these potion ingredients. See how that kind of works? Now, it's really important for stakes to make sure that your desire builds over the plot. I'll talk more about this when we get into the plot section, like kind of how to make sure this happens. But you don't want the desire to stay baseline, right? Like that's how you're gonna get like the saggy middle of your book, is where the main character is just doing things over and over again, but their desire line is not changing. You want things in your plot to be happening that's going to increase the desire with every single beat. And then we move on to side characters. So Truby introduces this idea of a character web, which is a little bit complex, but I do think it's worth at least kind of toying with in this early stage of novel development, at the very least with your main character and villain or antagonist, just because that's like the most important relationship dynamic in your book, right? You really want to make sure that they have different values and different ideas and different takes on the theme. The general goal of the character web is to create a cast of characters that, number one, force the main character to deal deal with their weakness, and they all look at the theme differently. To simplify, it's basically a compare-contrast game that you're gonna do on like a piece of notebook paper or something. I actually did the full cast of main characters in the odds. I only did it with the hero and the villain in the Class Witch. Since I did the more complex version with this book, I'm gonna use it as the example. You're gonna start with your theme, right? And so the theme of this book is that ability, whether it's magical or able-bodiedness, does not define your worth. As you can see, there is a theme with the books for children that I like to write. And basically, we are taking the idea of worthiness and brainstorming how individual characters could view this differently. For example, my main character, she is thinking that ability does define your worth. Character 1 agrees with her. They think that worth is dependent on your ability. Character 2, however, completely disregards ability as important. They don't care if you're able-bodied, they don't care if you have magic. That has nothing to do with your worth. Character 3, however, lets others decide their worth. So you can see how if character 3 was in the presence of character 1, they would think different about themselves than if they were in the presence of character 2. These beliefs will play out throughout the novel in dialogue and also just in actions and the characters' personalities. One little fun tidbit that John throws in there, John, like we're on first name basis. Johnny Boy threw in there the idea of making your main character have a bit of a mystery to really intrigue the reader. Now this always works like a charm for me as the reader because I love mystery plots. Like those are my very, very favorite. I will always have a mystery plot, I feel like, in everything I write because I just love them as a reader. So if I feel like the main character is keeping something from me, then I'm immediately intrigued and I want to read more. A lot of simple ways that a writer does this is by keeping the traumatic past, whatever gave them that weakness, hide that from the reader for a little while, tease it to the reader for a bit, don't give it to them all up front. So brainstorm some ideas about what mystery my main character could have that could be slowly alluded to. And then last but not least, we have a little section on character conflict. Now this is the main thing that is going to force your character to grow and change. The entire reason that you have a supporting cast of characters is to put that pressure on the main character. Truby's exercise for doing this is through the four-corner opposition, which looks much more complicated than I think it needs to be. The general idea is that you're taking that list of the character ideas and how they all have a different idea of theme, and you're brainstorming ways that those different ideas of theme would lead to different plot points and conflicts given those beliefs. So like, how could a character who holds a slightly different view on theme, a slightly different idea of the main character's weakness, how would they act in a way that would portray that? Each character should have a different answer, and I think this is a really good brainstorming tool because it might spark some really fun plot ideas. Another little extra like oomph, just to take it to the next level, is to brainstorm ways in which your main character's opponents could be opponents of each other as well. That's always fun. I see that happening a lot of times in TV shows, and I love that. It adds so much depth. We are finally on to plot, the 22 beats of storytelling. This is kind of what John Truby is most known for, most popular for. This is what most people get out of the book when they buy it. The great thing is a lot of these can be taken out of order, so you can kind of make it fit the story that you want. And Truby is not going to say this, but I think that if you enjoy pantsing and you want to do a first draft and just pants your way through it, that's totally fine. And then take these 22 steps and kind of like mold your story to have the right kind of structure in a subsequent draft. Of course, Truby is going to say you need to do all of this work before, which is fine, but not everybody's creativity works best that way. As long as you implement structure at some point, I think you're good to go. Now, I have decided to break these 22 steps up into the acts that I personally put them in. Again, you can do whatever you want, but the first 4 beats are what I consider my first act. The first one is your self-revelation, your need, and your desire, and you should already have these already figured out from your brainstorming, so easy peasy. When I'm writing, I try to have all of these things appear as quickly as possible, so it really makes the character feel real and human, like we have the potential of growth in the story. So really in chapters 1 and 2, I try to nail this down and really show you the beginning of their arc, what they they could possibly need and a desire line that could happen. Number 2 is the ghost. Now this is the tragic backstory, the terrible thing that haunts them still to this day that they need to overcome in order to have that character growth. Number 3 is your weakness and your needs. This is where you're showing how the character, their bad thinking is keeping them down, keeping them miserable, and also if you're going to have the weakness where they're hurting others, you would show this too in your first few chapters. And then number 4 is the inciting incident. This is the external thing that happens that forces your character to make a plan and take action. Again, all 4 of these steps I like to happen in my first act, or I consider my first act, and I really try to have them happen, of course, as dramatically as possible, but also like succinct as possible so it has the most impact. For the glass switch, I have all 4 of these things happening in the first 3 chapters, and in the odds, I have all 4 of these things happening in the first 5 chapters. So that kind of shows you first act 3 chapters, first act 5 chapters. Again, this is just how I interpret it. If you see your first act differently, that's totally fine. Steps 5 through 14 are what I consider my second act. Number 5 is the desire, which again, you already should have from your brainstorming practices that you've done in the past. This desire is of course spurred on by your inciting incident and will kick off your second act with a good amount of action, your character taking action to do something. That way you don't start off the second act, you know, really saggy and boring. You're gonna keep your reader going all the way through. Number 6 is your allies. If you haven't already gotten to introduce your main character's buddies during the first act, you want to do this really soon into the second act. This is just where they solidify as joining your main character to solve or to go on some task. Just for an example, Addie's best friend Fatima is introduced in chapter 2, but she is not solidified as like the true buddy sidekick that's gonna go with her through the task until chapter 8. Again, with this, the side character Bass is introduced in chapter 4, so still my first act, but he is not fully into sidekick mode going on this adventure with her until chapter 6 in act 2. Number 7 is your opponents or your mystery, or really both if you have them. Opponents and mysteries function in the same way. They keep your main character from achieving their goal right off the bat. I personally love mystery subplots, so all of my books have them. Right around this time, the main characters are gonna start getting their first little hints or their first little clues about what's happening. Alternatively, if you don't have a mystery subplot, but you do have an opponent, this could be the first time your main character encounters them, has their first attack, so on. For the odds, we have the first little inkling of the mystery appearing in chapter 6. So right at the start, if the start of act 2 for me is chapter 5, I'm introducing this right in chapter 6. Number 8 is the fake ally opponent. Now, Truby puts a lot of emphasis on reveals, how your story quality is only as good as the reveals. Not everyone is going to agree with this sentiment. Also, not every story is going to fit having a fake friend backstabbing plotline, right? In my personal opinion, I think this is a fun thing to sprinkle in, but not necessary. I did go ahead and do this with the odds. In fact, I have this character introduced in Act 1. Of course, you're not going to know it until the reveal. However, this just kind of shows the fluidity of these beats. You can move them around and put them where you need to go to fit your story best. Like I mentioned before, Truby puts a lot of emphasis on reveals in your plot. So step 9 is the first reveal and character change. According to Truby, any new information gathered by the main character is a reveal. So your main character at this point in the story is learning some sort of new information that changes the way, changes their motivation for how bad they want their goal, and with more fire, they go after it. I might have mentioned this before already, but with your reveals, with the information that your character learns over the story, you don't want to start out with the biggest, most massive plot twist, like, you know, right at the beginning of your second act. You want to kind of like have this information or reveals grow in intensity as the story goes on. For the glass witch, I have this first reveal come in chapter 8 when Addie learns there's actually a spell that exists that could break her curse. Now, step 10, the plan, is most likely going to be combined with other steps in this list. It's going to span multiple chapters and continue. I think Truby says that the plan encompasses a lot of these other steps all the way up until like step 14 or so. So it's a big chunk of your book. This is the promise of the premise, which is I think a term from Save the Cat, which is another popular craft book, where this is what your story is about. This is the training montage. This is the dating and the romance book. This is the going on the adventure to get the ring back to Mordor. You know, this is the bulk right here. In this part, the main character is executing their plan to reach their goal. Now, this plan initially does need to fail, or it needs to be flawed by the opponent, or it does need to change because we need it to be dynamic. You don't want to be repeating the same plot beats over and over again. So instead of Frodo getting the ring directly to Mordor, we have the team being attacked by orcs. We have them all split up. We have them dealing with a plethora of things where their plan is to go straight there and dump the ring, but they're not able to because their plan is messed up by their enemies. The plan for me in The Glass Witch happens right after the reveal in chapter 8 that there is a spell out there that can break Addie's curse. Her plan is to find these potion ingredients needed to be able to do that, and that takes over most of Act 2 and quite a few chapters, but it's not straightforward. She finds one potion ingredient, she gets in a fight, she loses another, she has to go through tasks to re-get these potions, see if they're available anywhere else, and she has to go all over town fighting both the witch hunter and the family of humans that hate witches. And this part of the story should be deeply frustrating for your main character. Number 11 is the opponent's counterattack. This we already kind of discussed. The counterattack would be the witch hunter trying to take the potion ingredients from Addie or keep her from getting to the potion ingredients. Also, the townsfolk forming a mob to witch hunt is an opponent counterattack. So you can kind of see how all of this will fall under the umbrella of step 10, the plan. Step 12 is the drive. Because the main character is trying to reach their goal, but their plans keep getting disrupted by the opponents, they feel like the opponent is stronger than them. They're gonna be frustrated. However, at this point, they are still driven to reach that goal because there are reveals happening that are really motivating them to keep going towards it. During this part of the story as well, we're gonna see a lot of that harmful misbelief that your main character is still clinging to come around. They're gonna be doing immoral actions if that is something that comes from that weakness, how they're treating themselves, how they're treating others, how this negative mindset is actually keeping them back and maybe even helping the opponent be able to disrupt their plans. And of course, your main character will not be able to see any of this right now. It's very, very crucial, according to Truby, and I do kind of agree with this, that there needs to be new information learned by your main character or these reveals, and that somehow changes how the main character is adapting their plan to reach their goal. If this is not happening, if they are not receiving new information and they are not changing according to this new information, then you are going to have this saggy middle where the main character is doing the same things over and over again. Maybe there's a different coat of paint on top of it, but since they're not changing, they're not growing, the plot isn't really progressing, it's not going to be fun for the reader. It's not going to be fun for the reader. Step 13 is the attack by the ally. This is usually just a very simple conversation where your main character's sidekick or someone that the character respects and a lot of times loves tells them, hey, you've got this weakness and you're holding yourself back and you need to change. Of course, your main character at this point is not going to agree with them, is going to dismiss the idea, but you have given your reader the little hint of that change that will be happening later by this conversation. And step 14, this is usually the end of Act 2 for me. This is the apparent defeat. This happens around 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through your novel, where the main character suffers some kind of loss that feels like it's the end for them. This for me happens in The Glass Witch at chapter 15. Now this is chapter 15 out of 22, mind you, so you kind of know where we are in the story. But this is where Addie has some people that she cares very deeply about. Something very tragic happens to them. And for her, this feels like the end of the tale and she can't go on. The villain is stronger than ever and it seems like he's won. Moving on into the third act and the last 8 beats of the 22 steps of story. Step 15 is another revelation and an obsessive drive. After the apparent defeat, after it seems like they cannot win no matter what they can do, the main character learns some kind of new information that spurs them on like never before. Whatever the information is, they fully become obsessed with reaching their goal and they will do anything to achieve it. Step 16 is the audience revelation. This is where the audience or the reader of the book actually learns a set of information before the main character does. I'm not gonna lie, you guys, I don't like this step. I don't use it. I personally feel like it takes tension away from the novel and it reminds me that I am reading a book instead of just living the book experience. So I actually never put this step into my books. Now everyone can think however they want, and also I think that the right situation, maybe the right story, would make this part really pop. But so far I have not written a book where this was necessary, so I usually skip this step. Number 17 is the next revelation and decision. If you have some massive bomb dropping plot twist, this is where you drop it. This is your big bad. Usually if you have the fake ally opponent where you have a friend stab you in the back, it happens right here. Right after that, in step 18, we have the dark night of the soul, or the journey to death, whatever you call it. This is very clearly when all is lost. It is different from step 14, which is the apparent defeat, because that one has happened earlier in the story and the main character has overcome it. They really don't think they can do it this time. They have lost everything there is to lose. Truby also says this is one of the most movable of all of the steps. You can put it a few steps above, a few steps below, wherever it's going to be the most dynamic for your story is where it needs to go. Step 19 is the final battle. This is your big conflict between the big bad and your main character and their self, which leads straight into step 20, which is the self-revelation. This is a shattering, earth-bending realization that your character has, where they finally see the truth, the wool is off their eyes, and they're able to see this weakened, bad self-talk, thinking that they've had the full story, and they are able now to see the truth and change. From there we have 21, which is the moral decision, and that is the change. This is proof that the main character, action-wise proof that the main character has made this internal change. Now they are going to make a decision, do something plot-wise that is going to prove they have changed, and usually this is the climax of the story. Whatever action they take here is what defeats the big bad. And last but not least, we have step 22, the falling action, which is the new equilibrium. This is where all of the trials are over. You see the main character get to rest and sink into their new life with their new way of thinking. One quick word about reveals. Again, I know we already went over this, but I wrote down that Truby recommends that you track all of your reveals as if you would an outline. I personally do this. I find it so helpful. Again, you want these reveals building in intensity and growing closer and closer together as they get more intense up until that final ball drop at the climax. Now, I work first and foremost in a notebook, like on paper with a pen, kind of figuring out and playing with things while I'm brainstorming. But once I have those really down and I've moved on to this plot section and I feel firm in where I want the plot, I put everything in Excel and I start tracking different sections to keep everything super organized. I have a section for the plot, the action that's happening. I have a section for character arc, how the character is combating their weakness or how it's being portrayed in this chapter. If there is a subplot, usually a mystery or a romantic arc, that will be tracked here too. I like to see the stepping stones. The reveals are tracked here as well. I want to know what is being revealed in each chapter, if something is being revealed in each chapter. Okay, so that's it. That's the 4 most important chapters, in my opinion, of Anatomy of Story and how I use them. I mean, if I haven't said it enough, I think this craft book is brilliant. Honestly brilliant. It has changed the way that I think about constructing stories. Again, I highly recommend picking up your own copy and reading the full thing because there are 11 chapters and I only covered 4. If you have any particular questions, leave them in the comments down below and I will try to answer the best that I can. Did you learn about anything in this video that you think actually might help you become a better story crafter? I hope so. I hope you got something out of this. But that is all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget that you can order the Glass Witch and pre-order the odds anywhere books are sold. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel and I would appreciate it so much. And thank you once again for watching and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!